most and least useful policies that states and tribes have instituted when wolves became their management responsibility? Larry, Mark, and then Ed.
Well, I talked to some folks and said I was going to be in a debate. I've never been in a debate, don't know how to do it. They said, well, answer the question you want, don't answer the question that's asked. So I'm going to take my time first to thank Nancy and the organizers of this symposium. And I'm going to thank Michael Phillips for giving me the invite to be here. I think that probably if I was to talk about a worse policy, it would be policies that talk about wolves as a predator open to season all year round. I think that created a division that was unnecessary. I think there's a way to institute management actions in zones without creating a vitriolic debate over a connotation of value for a critter, and I think that was very divisive. I think the best actions, quite frankly, were the courage of my predecessors to say that we would get involved in restoring a component of our ecosystem to the landscape. I think the best policies, though, are those in which we integrate a reality of understanding that when we talk about wolves, we're talking about the fabric of conservation. You can't talk about wolves in isolation. When we talk about an effort to enable people who live and actively work and engage in their daily lives out in working landscapes where we recover Mexican wolf, and do it in a way that they have some assurances about their future, I think that's a good policy. When we say, let's just eliminate those people from the landscape, we create a vitriolic debate. Those enemies have become enemies of conservation. They become the constituents that drive for the gutting of financial foundations of programs. Those are not the way to go, and I think those are bad policies.
Mike.
Nancy, I want to make sure I understand the question, and everyone else, can you repeat it, please?
Sure. What are the most and least useful policies that states and tribes have instituted when wolves became their management responsibility?
So everybody understands wolves are now delisted, and so what are the states and tribes doing well, and what are they doing poorly? One thing the states have done well is they're willing to engage. I can't say enough about Director Voiles agreeing to come and be part of this today. More than any other state in the Union, Arizona has chosen for a long time to be proactively involved in wolf recovery. That's not typically the case. We let red wolves go in North Carolina, and State Representative Zeno Edwards passed a bill that allowed North Carolinians to kill red wolves in direct violation of federal law. Most states oppose these activities to the bitter end, not Arizona. It says a great deal about Director Voiles and that state game department that they're here doing their best to advance this issue. So they've done well, they've engaged. What they haven't done well, and Bob Ream can testify to this as a previous chairman of Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks Commission, the states haven't done an especially good job of educating about the role of wolves once they're recovered. As a state legislator, a senator in Montana, I sit in committees and listen to knuckleheads make knuckleheaded decisions on things that don't resemble facts. So for example, in Montana, they'll say, well, we've got to reduce wolf numbers because elk are nearly absent from the landscape. And yet the state's game departments show nearly every elk management unit in the state of Montana is above objective. So when you try to get legislators to focus on facts, they drag their heels sometimes if those facts run counter to their worldview. And I don't think the state game departments that I work most closely with, Montana specifically, has done a very good job engaging on facts.
And Ed.
Well, I think I misunderstood the question a little bit because the states had a big role in wolf management while they were listed. Perhaps they should even have a larger role. Just jog everybody's memory, when we did the reintroductions to wolves to Central Idaho and Yellowstone, the chief photographer in Canada capturing all that for all the media attention was the chief photographer from Wyoming Game and Fish. The veterinary scientist that led all the disease testing and screening was the chief veterinary scientist from Wyoming Game and Fish. the states were involved in that program. I think the biggest mistake the states have made, and I think the service is partly responsible for this, is they weren't involved strongly enough where wolves were listed. The idea we had in the Northern Rocky Mountains, that I think Jamie was director at the time, is we would reintroduce wolves, we would then step aside and the states would manage wolves to recovery. They would get all the credit for having the wolf data. They would develop the personal relationships, the professional relationships, the expertise for wolf management. And when it got time to delist, that would go much more smoothly because then they would have the credibility and the trust of local people. That didn't happen because of politics. The states essentially just dumped the whole thing off, and so we had this very hard transition. I think the states have maybe overreacted a little bit with the rhetoric about killing more wolves and all that kind of stuff, but I think we have to realize that maybe we put them in that position a little bit by not having them be able to be on board politically early on. I think right now the pendulum's swinging. There's certainly a lot of rhetoric about killing wolves and blah, blah, blah. I think wolf populations are going to survive all that fine. So I'm hoping the states are going to, the rhetoric will die down and they'll self-correct.
All right, so I'm going to offer the panel an opportunity for rebuttal to any comments made on the last question. And we'll go in the same order, Larry, Mike, and Ed.
Well, thank you, Nancy. I wanted just one quick moment to be able to rebut one thing that Michael Phillips said. And Michael said that the states do a terrible job of educating, and then he starts speaking about the legislature. And this isn't really a rebuttal. I mean, you know, there's no question we've done a terrible job of managing the legislature, managing wildlife and working with human conflict and wolves in the Endangered Species Act. I'm willing to take that on, Mike, but I absolutely refuse to manage you legislators. I'm just not going to go there. I don't have that kind of courage.
Well, and so is my turn?
Yes, Mike.
It's my turn. Unfortunately, I couldn't agree with the director more, but legislatures control the state game departments in a lot of ways. And when I spoke about state efforts, I was speaking specifically of Montana. I don't think we've done a very good job educating. Arizona is a data outlier. As I said, they've always been a data outlier. I take exception to Ed's characterization that the state of Montana, Wyoming, Idaho were actively involved in the front end of recovery in the Northern Rockies. They simply were involved in some one-off efforts, and that's great that they had a photographer in Canada. But I know Ed and Wayne Brewster, a master tactician, went out of their way to say to the states, we want you to run this program. Director Clark would have supported that. The states said no because it's a losing proposition. You piss everybody off. It's an unfunded federal mandate. And so, predictably, the states backed away. As it turns out, the Department of Interior is more than capable of doing the work, not only technically, but they have more than enough statutory authority to work across all of the boundaries that define the United States, so that the states walked away. By no means submarined the effort to restore gray wolves in the Northern Rocky Mountains, but make no mistake, it was a federal initiative. Now, Ed's right, the states came on late. Montana especially tried to lead the way, and we did a nice job. That has changed as of late. But this has been a federal initiative, because nationwide the public has said more than once the Endangered Species Act is important. Nothing's going to disappear on my watch, and even when it's hard, I expect it to be implemented. But that's why when you look at the act, it hasn't been fundamentally changed in quite a long while. It hasn't been fundamentally weakened, even though that was an aim of some members elected to the United States Congress in the recent past. You should be proud of your federal government. They've done a nice job. They've made some mistakes, but overall, they've done a heck of a job.
Thank you. Now, audience, if you have question cards...
Do I get a rebuttal?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I would like to be able to say, Mike, I agree with you totally. But what I'm really going to say is put down the crack pipe. I think one thing I've kind of noticed here is one, there's a reason that Larry's been the director of Arizona Game and Fish for 6 years. He's pretty smooth. I like that. That's good stuff. And Mike, there's a reason you're on the far left and involved in Mexican wolf stuff too much. And if I seem to remember, I think you were standing inside Yellowstone Park when we actually gave the wolves to you, and it just got there. And so I think you forget that the EIS portion of Idaho was actually written by the man who now manages wolves in the state of Idaho. So the states were an active partner in terms of the scoping issues. They all had their state troopers standing next to me so I wouldn't be drugged out and lynched. They participated as much as politics would let them do, and I don't think they get enough credit for that. In '94, the election switched on the national level to hardcore anti-government kind of thing. That happened in all the state legislatures, and so our partners had to go underground for a while. And so I think the states were actively involved, and I think the service could have done maybe a little bit more to try and keep them involved, but just kind of political stuff we couldn't. I think what this debate says is that there's a lot of different viewpoints and opinions, that we're able to discuss this stuff pretty openly and transparently. I think that's a very healthy thing. And I think that's how we'll get to solutions that everybody can live with, is to kind of let people speak freely, even if their ideas, like Mike's, aren't that good sometimes. and kind of respect each other's values, and there's going to be differences, and have patience with each other to just kind of work through this stuff.